All right, so it looks like we're on,
I'm gonna move across the way because.
and Nancy's going to move across the way because. Okay. All right, we ready to rock and roll here, folks? Inside? Are you ready? Are we ready? Okay. So I know we did Zoroastrianism last week, or at least we tried to. I'm going to repeat it this week for two reasons. One, we failed to record it last week, and there were people who asked us if we could record it and then post it online and have it, and that wasn't going to happen. And then the second thing was, when I got to looking at the slides again anyway, I did a little bit more research and found out some more information about Zoroastrianism, which I've plugged into this new presentation. So there's some new material here, and if you can identify what it is, different from last week, I'll give you $5. All right. Okay. So is this my mouse or yours, dear? You got the right one? Okay, you're good. All right. So actually, Nancy, my dear wife, who's now sitting a million miles away from me across the room, asked a question a couple of weeks ago that I found the answer to when I was looking into Zoroastrianism this last week. And her question was, how did the cow become so relevant in the Hindu religion? And interestingly, when I went into Hinduism, I really didn't get a very satisfactory answer. But when I did the Zoroastrianism research, it turns out that Zoroastrians actually worship the spirit of the cow. And the cow is part of their creation myth. And in their creation myth, the creation cow was destroyed, but its flesh was reused to create all the animals in existence. So it is the mother animal, if you like. And also is because it is docile, tranquil, just grazes. It doesn't cause anyone intentionally any harm. And it is one of the animals that's considered to be good. And that's something else I discovered about Zoroastrianism, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. But that is, things in the world are divided into good and not good. Not evil, we would call them evil, but simply not good. So light is good, darkness is not good. It's not necessarily evil, it doesn't do harm, but it's not good. It's not one of the things that's identified as a good thing.
All the way through Genesis 1, God pronounced everything good, 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 and then very good. And in chapter 2, God says, not it's evil, but it is not good for the human to be alone.
Gosh, I wonder where they got that from. Okay, so a little bit of a recap here, if you remember. The foremost scholar of Zoroastrianism was Mary Elizabeth Boyce. She's now passed away. A British scholar of Iranian languages and an authority on Zoroastrianism. And she wrote, I'm pausing for a moment because Jeff's walked in. Huh?
That is somebody that we should let in, whoever's in charge of.
It's Diana Walker.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Diana Walker.
Can you come and let her in, Dick?
Bonnie Walker.
Oh, Bonnie, yeah, she would be good too. Yeah, she's.
Well, Bonnie Walker's in.
Diana's mother-in-law.
She's gonna probably log in.
Tell her to try to come in again, and then see if you can do the admin.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure I can, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. All right, those of you online, we're just trying to establish who someone who wanted to sign in was before we let them into the room. And now we're going to let them in, but we have to do some technical hoop jumping.
It'll come up.
Tell them to try again. Well, while we're waiting for that, let's go on. Zoroastrianism, this is Mary Boyce's writing. Zoroastrianism is the oldest of the revealed world religions and has probably had more influence on humankind directly and indirectly than any other single faith. There we go. She continues, Zoroaster was the first to teach the doctrines of an individual judgment, heaven and hell, the future resurrection of the body, the general last judgment, and life everlasting for the reunited soul and body. These doctrines were to become familiar articles of faith to much of humankind through borrowings by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But it is in Zoroastrianism itself that they have their fullest logical coherence. And as is always the case, when religions borrow ideas from other religions, they tend to sort of adapt them or retranslate them or modify them to suit the new religion. And so the point she's making here is only in Zoroastrianism does all of these ideas, judgment, heaven and hell, and so on, come together as a coherent whole. The others are sort of just like, you know, Christianity has added some stuff in from Zoroastrianism. Judaism has added some stuff in, and it doesn't quite make the full logical sense that it all does in Zoroastrianism. So here we are looking at beginnings of Zoroastrianism. We've moved westward. Arianism began on the Iranian plateau in eastern Iran. It moved east first and became Hinduism in India. And in India, of course, Hinduism became Buddhism on one hand and Jainism on the other. So we've covered that. So now we're looking at Zoroastrianism, which was a more Western form of Arianism. And we've just traced that, the theme of the cow, the sacred cow, the spirit of the cow, as actually something that emerged from Arianism and was carried into Hinduism. We have all know that the sacred cow is in India. And in fact, it appears that the cow was a sacred animal also in Zoroastrianism. So the major literary resources for Zoroastrians are things called the Gathas, or the hymns. They are to Zoroastrians what the Pentateuch, and if you don't remember the Pentateuch, that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, what that is to the Jews, which is the very source of their faith and practice. And the Gathas date to the earliest times of Zoroastrianism. In fact, they were first spoken by Zoroaster himself. The Gathas indicate that the Aryans were nature worshippers who venerated a series of gods, many of whom are, of course, also mentioned in Hindu Vedic literature. Why is that? Well, because Hinduism comes from Aryanism, Zoroastrianism comes from Aryanism. These deities, known as devas, were associated with earth, air, fire, and water. The most important of these early deities was one known as Mithras, also known as Mithra or Mitra, known as the giver and benefactor of cattle. There's that cow thing again, a god of light, and the representative of loyalty and obedience. Being a god of light, he must be a good god, right? It is the last characteristics that later made Mithra a favorite of Roman legions, that idea of loyalty and obedience. Roman soldiers, loyal and obedient to the empire, and they built temples all over the Roman Empire. And as I mentioned last week, Nancy and I took our sons one time in Spain to drive up a mountain where we came across a temple to Mithra in a electrical storm, thunderstorm. And so this whole temple is lit up by flashes of lightning and everything. It's quite impressive at the top of the mountain there. And obviously it's been there about 2,000 years, waiting for the Romans to come back. And there is a very common statue of Mithra wrestling with the sacred cow. This is an image of Zoroaster I found online. Don't believe it. We have no idea what he looked like. No one thought to, in the same way of Jesus, we don't know if Jesus, you know, had a lisp or an accent, or if he had a beard or didn't have a beard. We know nothing. And so this is just sort of a... Right. Dating Zoroaster's exact birthday is impossible. Most scholars agree that it was around 1000 BC. It's also known that he married and had 3 sons and 3 daughters. Regardless of that, Zoroaster's date of birth, one fixed part of the legend is that his mother gave virgin birth to him. And what is known is that he became a priest in the Aryan religion, and subsequently, of course, the only founder of a faith, Zoroastrianism, who actually started out as a priest in another religion. Now, this 3 sons and 3 daughters thing is going to show up a little later in this story, because The spirits come to visit him, 6 spirits, and there are 3 male spirits and 3 female spirits. So which came first, the sons and daughters or the spirits? Anyway. So one day when he was about age 20, the time of a spring festival came around. This is new. We didn't know this last week. Zoroaster went to a local river to bathe in preparation for the festival. But as he came up out of the water, think about that image for a minute, coming up out of the water, he had an intense vision of light. And then the angel Vohumana spoke to him, revealing many truths to him, including the fact that there was only one true God. We'll get to the God there in a second, but who else do we know in history who went into the water and then came out and had a vision and heard a voice from on high? Jesus. And so this God that was revealed to Zoroaster was Ahura Mazda. And the name means great wise one or highest wise one. And Vohumana, this angel that's speaking to Zoroaster, told Zoroaster that he was to be the prophet of Ahura Mazda. Over the next 10 years, Zoroaster is visited by 5 more different archangels who each delivered to him further truths. This is the kind of thing that happens in what we call revealed religions. Christianity is a revealed religion. Someone spoke from on high and revealed it. Remember the 10 Commandments on the mountain, for example. Christianity is a revealed religion. It's a new revelation of an old religion. But so this is where we get the idea of a revealed religions. Having been delivered all these truths, Zoroaster really figured out he could no longer be an Aryan. This wasn't right, and he needed to travel around the country spreading the good news. But he was met mostly with derision and abuse. Does that someone laughed. Nevertheless, he pressed on. Finally, Vishtapa, a ruler in the kingdom of Bactria, heard of this strange person and invited him to his court. And there, you'd think some of the maps, online, Google would have every map under the sun. I couldn't really find a good one, but this one actually shows where the Greek Bactrian kingdom was, and that would be more or less the same location as Vishtapa's realm. And you see it's northwest of India and northeast of Arabia, right up on the plateau again of the former Aryan religion, which still survived at this time in history. Aryanism was still going on very nicely, thank you. So Zoroaster goes to Vishtapa and visits him and his wife, and Vishtapa liked what Zoroaster had to say, and before long he converted to the new religion along with his wife. Soon, all of Vishtapa's court was converted, because it's the thing you do, right? If the boss does something and you want to stay in the boss's good books, you do the same thing. And the religion itself then spread throughout the land of the Aryans, or Persia, as we know today, modern-day Iran. Now, the Persian Empire grew, and we're cutting through a lot of history here, but you can see how big it ultimately became. This was the Persian Empire in the time of the Achaemenids, which would be the early decades of the Common Era.
No, snapshot it.
Well, and also keep in mind the Persian Empire was the empire when the Israelites were allowed to return from Babylon to Jerusalem and began the rebuilding process and reestablishing life there in Palestine.
Yeah.
That was all under the Persian.
And you can see where Babylonia is down here. I'm making the little, I'm hoping it's going around there as well. Yes, you see Babylonia. So, and we will get to that shortly. Although Zoroaster asserted the supremacy of a single god, Ahura Mazda, Mithra, the principal Aryan god, who everybody liked, even though they converted, couldn't let go of him, couldn't be replaced in the minds of the Aryan people. So he therefore reappears as a judge in the Zoroastrian version of Judgment Day, which we'll come back to. Zoroastrianism believes that before Zoroaster, there had been a series of prophets and that Zoroaster was the last and greatest of them. We'll find the same kind of story when we come to Islam. Muhammad said there had been a lot of prophets in the past and they'd revealed the truth, but the truth had become distorted. And so now Muhammad comes along and is the last and greatest of all the prophets and establishes the true, correct religion on earth. But that's a few centuries in the future from where we are right now. But you should be able to get some inklings of the borrowings these religions have made from early Zoroastrianism. A principal characteristic of Zoroastrianism was that it replaced ritual animal sacrifice, which was the sort of the standard feature of the Aryan religion, with the maintenance of a perpetual flame of sandalwood on the temple high altar, providing both light and a pleasing scent. And again, this concept of light is very important in Zoroastrianism. Things that are light, bright, white day, as opposed to night, these are good. These are in the realm of good. And it doesn't hurt that the stuff you're burning smells nice. However, as a side note, we don't exactly know when Zoroaster died, but we do know how he was killed while tending the sacred flame in the fire temple. And the temples are all called fire temples because that's the home of the sacred flame. Now, it may be of interest to know that Zoroastrian priests were known as Magi. And it was Magi that visited Jesus. And it is also the source of the word magician. So what does Zoroastrians teach? Well, there's one God, Ahura Mazda. He created the world. He was the one God whom the Aryans had previously worshipped as a supreme being. All other ancient gods were false. That's the first thing you've got to do when you do something like this. You've got to deny everything that happened in the past and then create a new future. Like the Brahman Atman of Hinduism, Ahura Mazda is too great to be known as he is. So he appears as the Amisha Spenta, the 6 holy immortals or archangels. These are the same 6 that came to Zoroaster, beginning with the visitation when he came up out of the river, and then in the 10 years subsequent, he's visited by all these archangels who all reveal ongoing truths to him. And there's Spenta Mainyu, Asha, Vahishta, Vohumana, Spenta Armatai, Kashratha Vareya, Ameratat, and Horvatat. And there they are in all their glory, emanating from the center source of light. Yeah, well, there's an odd one out, okay, and it's you'll see in a second. It's not really a spirit. Yeah. 3 of these embody maleness and 3 femaleness. Thus, the total nature of Ahura Mazda is a perfect balance of male and female. So we have to account for that odd one, but it will become clear. Whoops. There is a host of angels surrounding the throne of Ahura Mazda. Who else has a host of angels surrounding him in heaven? God, right. These are not hard questions, right? Perhaps Zoroaster's greatest contribution to the religions of the world was the problem of evil. The world is full of good and evil. It's easy to ascribe good to God, but who is responsible for evil? You getting an inkling now about who that might be? Okay. Zoroaster taught that there are 2 realities that emanate from Ahura Mazda. One is Spenta Mainyu, the beneficent spirit, otherwise known as the good. The other reality is Angra Mainyu, otherwise known as evil. But while Spenta Mainyu is an actual spirit or an angel, Angra Mainyu is the personification of the concept of evil, which is simply really the absence of good. Now, do you get that? The personification of as opposed to actually being? So we have someone that we can relate to in this regard. It may help to explain the concept this way. In the Christian tradition, Christmas is a time of hope, of promise, of kindness and charity, and all things good. And although we all know, any kids about, he doesn't exist, we personify these Christmas characteristics as Santa Claus. In the same way, in Zoroastrianism, the concept of evil, the absence of good, is personified as Angra Mainyu. So there's your seventh, right? But he's not really a being. It's just the absence of. But it is a personification, like Santa Claus is a personification of Christmas time. Does that make sense to most of you? At least, okay.
Well, I don't know why they have to list them with the good. Why is the bad one listed along with the good?
Go and find a Zoroastrian and ask him. Both the reality of good and the reality of evil, the absence of good, have existed since the beginning of time. That is, by defining words, actions, and things as good, Ahura Mazda is necessarily identifying things that are not good as evil. You know, it's like that one of those sayings, if you're not with me, you're against me. There is no neutral ground there. Obviously, neither is free from the influence of the other, because wherever there is good, you can identify, they go together, the bad, the evil, the darkness. Oops. Both the reality of good and the reality of evil, the absence of good, have existed since the beginning of times. That is, by defining words, actions, and things as good, Ahura Mazda is necessarily identifying things that are not good as evil. Obviously, neither is free from the influence of the other, and each is bound by the other. Thus, when Ahura Mazda created the idea of good, he also created, maybe unwittingly, the possibility of not good and thus evil, meaning then that both good and evil come from Ahura Mazda. Maybe I've beaten that enough to death. I don't know. Another way of saying this is when we specifically identify something as positive, we imply that the things not positive must be negative. All right. Angra Mainyu, the evil spirit, is known by many other names: Ahriman, Shaitan, and Satan. And all of these terms translate the same way. The word is adversary, the enemy, the opposite. The personified adversary is surrounded by a host of personified servants who influence storm, wind, earthquake, flood, and other natural disasters, as well as influencing human nature to do his bidding, tempting and tormenting humans. That's kind of a familiar sound, the devil and all his little imps running around, right?
So, it just said, known by many other names. So in Zoroastrianism, there is actually now it's Satan, which is Satan.
Yes.
Paul, Satan,
Mhm.
and Zoroastrianism.
Yes. As we shall see when we get to Judaism and Christianity, Zoroastrianism had a great influence on both. I'll just mention here that one of my favorites, the Old Testament book of Job. In the opening verses, God permits an angel, Hasatan, the adversary, to test Job's faith. Hasatan's job is to torment Job with an overwhelming number of life tragedies to persuade Job to reject God. In other words, everything that happens to Job is things that happen all the time. He just had a lot of them. You know, a bunch of other tribes come down and murder his servants, and they carry his cattle captive, and the cattle die, and all kinds of unpleasant things happen. None of them by itself unusual, but what is unusual is they all happen to him, and it's all in a matter of days, right? And this is the bad. This is the bad. There are people who are not good, right? And there are events that are not good. And incidentally, in Zoroastrian, there are animals that are not good. Serpents, for example, as a general rule, are good, but there are not good serpents, the ones that bite. Frogs are okay, except poisonous frogs. They're not good, okay? So there's this balance all the way through nature of good and not good. Anyway, Hasatan's job is to torment Job with an overwhelming number of life tragedies to persuade Job to reject God, and this Job refuses to do. And in the end, all his losses are restored to him. It's a bit of a, not a very satisfactory ending to Job, because yeah, he gets everything back, but his sons and daughters are still dead. His cattle are all gone. You know, his original home has been destroyed and everything. It says, people still wrestle with that to this day, do they not? Yes. The moral of the story is that life, aka the adversary, is not without its ups and downs, but those who remain strong in their faith will be okay. So that's just an example of something that's trickled down, the ideas that are trickled down from Zoroastrianism. Okay, humankind and Zoroastrianism. Humankind plays a role in the struggle between good and evil by cooperating with either of the forces, just as we do today. Zoroaster believed humans were born in a neutral, sinless state and could choose which path each wanted to follow, whether that be the good path or the not good path. Their destiny depended on how they exercised their free will. No one is forced into doing anything, but you should be able to tell the good from the not good. You know, when I've been teaching students in the past about, you know, the importance of religion in our lives and what it does for moral standing, and students say, well, do we have to have religion to have morality? And the answer is no, we don't, because as human beings, we know the right thing to do in just about every situation, but sometimes we choose not to do it. But it's not like we're amoral or immoral. We know, we sense it, but we make a conscious choice to do the not good. The destiny of humankind in Zoroastrian teaching. People must stand responsible for their choices. Yep, you're given this free will, and now when you've exercised your free will, you're going to be judged on it. How did you do? After death, the soul remains with the body for 3 days. Then it journeys to the place of judgment, where it is judged by that god Mithra, according to its life deeds. If mostly evil, it's going to go to hell, which is actually not a good place. It's the not good place, right? You follow that concept of good and not good. If mostly good, then it goes to paradise. Where have we read about this or heard about this in recent classes? In Hinduism, right? Remember the multiple rebirths until you reach moksha, the samsara, 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 rebirth, 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 rebirth. And then finally, when you reach the top, your soul is looked at and how much it's encrusted by bad karma or good karma. And it's the same sort of thing. You weigh the soul. The soul does not know the judgment, but must cross the Chinvat. The name means sorting, the Chinvat bridge that leads to heaven. And here's a Persian art renditioning of some people crossing. And the sorting thing stuck out to me because of the Harry Potter, the sorting hat, you know, which house you're going to end up in. And you can see here we have the soul being weighed in a scale. And there's Spenta Mainyu is with Mithra. Spenta Mainyu is the principal good angel, if you remember. So making sure that everything is done exactly right. And you can see some souls there on the right side in the grayed out area that apparently didn't make it across the bridge, unfortunately. And 2 other people gently trying to make their way across. Here's that image again with some more information. The soul makes its way to the Chinvat bridge and begins to cross. Meanwhile, Mithra and Angra-Mainyu weigh the soul and come to a decision. If the sentence is paradise, then the bridge is wide and the soul makes it safely across. If it's hell, the not good place, the bridge narrows to a knife edge and the soul falls into the depths of the abyss. So there's 2 at the top. I'm not really quite sure if they're on a nice flat level surface or if they're walking on the edge of the knife. Perhaps we're not supposed to know. Keep us in suspense. Obviously, Zoroastrian ethics are based on the free will right to choose. also highly important is the sacredness of earth, air, fire, and water. Violation of any of these is wickedness. In Zoroastrian, life is a constant battle between light, good, and darkness, evil. To overcome darkness, one is required to focus on good thought. And that brings to mind the expression, the thought is father to the deed. If you always have good thoughts, then you cannot do bad things. Good word, no lying ever to anyone for any reason. Good deed, do unto others as you have done unto yourself. And since these precepts also appear both in Hinduism and Zoroastrianism, it seems reasonable to assume that they were also fundamentals of Arianism. In other words, since they've carried over into two strands of Arianism, and it's the same idea, then Arianism must have had it to begin with. To be righteous is to be being truthful always, practicing chastity, not celibacy. Sex is good, but sex under control. Doing justice, not being partial or biased, exercising compassion, going beyond sympathy to empathy, taking care of the earth, using but not exploiting resources, being charitable, being educated, giving service to the community. And in case you're wondering what the difference between empathy and sympathy is that empathy involves sharing in another person's feeling, while sympathy is more about understanding their suffering from your own perspective. In other words, not looking from the outside, but trying to be on the inside with this person. Pre-Zoroastrian worship focused heavily on blood sacrifice and heavy consumption of the fruit and liquor of the Haoma plant. Zoroastrianism replaced blood sacrifice. You can tell I was getting tired of writing Zoroastrianism every time there. Replaced blood sacrifice with ceremoniously taking bread dipped in clarified butter, like dipping bread into wine or something. Not that I'm trying to lead you anywhere. What the Haoma plant actually was is unknown, unfortunately, but its alleged attributes, that is the effects of its consumption, include it furthered healing, it nurtured affection, it was physically strengthening, it stimulated alertness and awareness, it was nourishing, it was most nutritious for the soul, and although mildly intoxicating, the extract had no negative side effects. Get me some.
So let's say yasna.
That's the worship. And that's the book of worship. But it's, well, we get to it in a second, but worship is literally reading scripture. Reading scripture. And people don't have to do it, but the priest does it in your presence. Later worship under Zoroaster centered, that's all of it, yeah. Later worship under Zoroaster centered on prayers for help and assistance in living a righteous life and avoiding temptation. Sacrifice shifted from the blood offerings of the Aryan Vedic religion to the burning of sandalwood on the altar like incense. While the center of faith is the temple, attendance by the faithful is usually only for specific rites. For example, investiture with the sadre, which is a sacred shirt you wear close to your skin, and the kushti, which is a sacred belt, and more on that in a second. The sacred flame needed to be tended day and night, a duty and responsibility of the Zoroastrian priesthood. During worship, all 72 verses of the yasna, which include the gathas, those hymns that originated with Zoroaster himself, are recited. So worship service lasts about 2.5 hours while someone reads all this stuff to you. Now, the 72 verses of the yasna, the book of worship and worship itself, is reflected in that kushti, that belt. The belt is made up of 72 threads, one for each verse of the book of worship. And then when you invested with the sacred shirt, the sadre, and then you put the kushti around it as a belt and tie it. And you tie it and untie it 5 times a day, like Muslims worship 5 times a day. See these ideas being carried forward as religions move forward. The Avesta is the primary collection of sacred texts of Zoroastrianism composed in the Avestan language, which is an East Iranian language known only from its use as the language of Zoroastrian scripture, the Avesta, from which it derives its name. Yasna, to answer your question, Avestan worship is the name of the primary liturgical collection of texts of the Avesta, as well as the name of the principal Zoroastrian act of worship at which those verses are recited. So in Hinduism, you know, puja means worship, and to do puja means to worship. And in Zoroastrianism, is yasna is the book of worship, and to do yasna is to worship. The yasna is primarily the name of the ceremony in which the entire book is recited, as I just said, and appropriate liturgical actions performed. In its normal form, this ceremony can only be performed in the morning. A well-trained priest is able to recite the entire 72 chapters of the yasna in about 2 hours. So when you decide to go to church, you probably better put 2.5, 3 hours aside of the day. At a certain age, 7 in India, and 10 in Iran, boys and girls are received into their religion with the investiture of the sacred shirt, sadre, and sacred threads, kushti, which is just now, like I said, woven into a belt. Except when bathing, they must wear these for the rest of their lives. The kushti is to be tied and untied 5 times a day as a form of prayer. And as I said, it's made up of 72 threads representing the 72 chapters of the yasna. And here is a young boy. He already has the shirt on. You can see one of the shirts in the upper right there. And then there's the kushti. He's being presented with it on the left there, and then it's tied around his waist below. And that's the first, after you have a bath every day, that's the first item of clothing that goes on, and then everything else goes on over that. Followers of Zoroastrianism are also known as Parsi or Parsis, particularly in northwest India, where there's a large collection of Zoroastrians. We've already spoken of the sacred nature of earth, air, fire, and water in Zoroastrianism. Their sacred nature presents difficulties when it comes to disposal of the human body after death. It can't be buried because that would contaminate the earth. It cannot be burned because that would contaminate the air. And it cannot be buried at sea or thrown in a river because that would contaminate the water. And if there's anyone out there online at the moment, you might want to not let young children see the next couple of slides here. I'll give you a second or two to move them away from the screen. The solution that the Zoroastrians came up with is the Towers of Silence. These towers are built at great distance from any inhabited area out in the wilderness someplace or other. After washing and being dressed in clean clothes, the bodies are taken to the Towers of Silence, where vultures do the cleansing. So on the left, you can see what's left of some bodies. The right top picture, the vultures waiting for their next meal. And then at the bottom is the bottom of the pit. And when the bones have been stripped clean, then they're just pushed off the edge into the bottom of the pit, kind of like the bottom of a flower pot. More recently, the bones have been recovered because it's been deemed that once they've been cleaned, they are now clean, good, right, and can be buried in the ground. They don't need to stay inside the Tower of Silence. And in the United States, where there are some Zoroastrians, it is of necessity they are buried in the ground, or in one of those cement coffins they have, like what we have here, to prevent the ground becoming contaminated, even though we're not Zoroastrians. Zoroastrianism was well established as the religion of the Persian people by the 6th century BCE. And I've got just a few minutes. Also in the 6th century, 539 in fact, the expansion of the Babylonian Empire incorporated Palestine and many Jews. Remember that purple map we saw earlier that showed how far the Persian Empire had extended, and I pointed out Babylonia there. When the Persians came in and took over, but had basically been the Assyrian territory, it was an empire, conquering empire, many of the Jews were taken from Judah into captivity in Babylonia. especially the priests and the literati and the glitterati of Jewish society. And they remained there for 50 years. And then the Babylonian Empire fell to Persia, led by Cyrus the Great. Cyrus's army brought the Persian culture and, of course, the religion of Zoroastrianism along with him, exposing the Jewish captives to Zoroastrian theology and beliefs. It's right at this time that Jewish scholars were assembling their history and studying their theology in an attempt to answer the question, if we are the sons and daughters of Abraham, the people of the covenant, the people of the promised land of Israel, what are we doing in Babylonia? And as they studied and wrote, aspects of Zoroastrianism influenced their thinking. While older biblical references make little note of resurrection of the body, little concern for life after death, no word of judgment day, nor even of Satan, each of these was a vital part of Zoroastrianism, was incorporated into the Jewish tradition, and by Jesus's day had become a vital part of Judaism too. For example, Zoroaster invoked saviors, messiahs, who, like the dawns of new days, would come to the world teaching righteousness. He hoped himself to be one of them. After his death, the belief in coming saviors developed further. He also incorporated belief in angels and demons. Zoroaster's ideas of ethical monotheism, heaven, hell, angelology, the study of angels, the resurrection of the body, and the Messiah figure have notable parallels in Judaism, Christianity, and later Islam. Christianity incorporated these items, and Muhammad, founder of Islam, made similar Zoroastrian features vital parts of Islam, as we shall see. Zoroastrianism is practiced on the Iranian plateau and certain parts of northwest India. There are a few Zoroastrians here in the United States. There may be 300,000 worldwide, so not a huge religion, but it's not the size of the religion that is important, but the influence that it has had over history on the other major world religions. So here it shows up, Zoroastrian, 2.6 million, about some tiny percent of the world population. And the last thing to talk about is Farvahar, and this is the symbol of Zoroastrianism. I have wasted many hours on Google trying to get an absolute clear description of what this thing is. It is the image. This has been the image of Zoroastrianism since Zoroastrianism came into being. But it seems like everyone you ask, including among Zoroastrians, has a different understanding of what this symbol means. This is just one that I picked at random, but don't take it as gospel by any stretch of the imagination. The hand pointing upwards is symbolic of choosing the right path. Being an aged male figure represents age and wisdom. Remember, Ahura Mazda means the great wise one, or the wisest one. The ring in the hand is a symbol of covenant and promises, as in marriage. The central ring kind of around the waist of the being there is the eternity of the universe and the soul. And then the upper feathers are the three principles of Zoroaster: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. And then the three opposing principles, the tail feathers, if you like: bad thoughts, bad words, bad deeds. And then the two loops that are coming out from the ring, it seems like. The loop facing the face is the positive force, and the loop facing back is the negative force. But I tell you, if you go home and look on Google, and you can put the two symbols side by side, and someone will have completely different descriptions. The only thing we know for a fact is when you see this, it's a symbol of Zoroastrianism. But exactly what it represents appears to have been lost to history. So do we have any questions?
About the influence of Zoroastrianism on Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, could we also say that we as humans, in our search for the ultimate other, there are just certain things embedded within us?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
there is good and there is the not good. And we look for figures that will come and, I don't know, use religious.
Yeah,
statements.
Yeah.
So is it a matter of direct borrowing or just kind of the common human seeking?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, but I mean, if we look back, and you'll know the answer to this because I've been struggling with the last few days. Where is the sing, the sing, I will praise the God of wisdom? That's an Assyrian,
Oh, praise God.
praise the God of wisdom. That's the opening words, an Assyrian prayer. So, it's not so much the individual ideas, it's the grouping of so many ideas in the religions subsequent to Zoroastrian. I mean, they come after Arianism really because they all begin in Arianism, but then they're refined depending if you go eastward or westward. The westward refinement incorporates so many of these ideas, which then show up again in subsequent religions all the way through. It's difficult for me, at least, not to accept that much of this influence came from Zoroastrianism. There are people opposed to that idea. There are people so opposed to that idea that they don't want, we know Zoroaster existed and we know he founded a religion, but some people date him to the 6th century BCE, in which case his teaching would not have had enough time to become refined to the extent that Judaism would be able to borrow from them. But the only reason they do that dating is they don't want Judaism or Christianity or any of the other later religions to be identified with Zoroaster. They want Christianity to have come up with it all from the get-go, you know, and I just don't think it happened that way. I think we do borrow, and there are cultural exchanges. Culture influences a lot of things too. When we get to Islam, which is a couple of lessons away, we're going to talk about how culture influences religion. And when a religion emerges in a violent culture, the religion ends up being a violent religion. When a religion develops in a more peaceful culture, then the religion is a more peaceful religion. That's not to say there's anything wrong with those religions, because religion is a reflection of who we are. We don't, we form religion and religion forms us. It's shaping from both sides. I'm not saying there isn't revelation. I'm not saying that God hasn't spoken from on high in some form or other, but it's what we do with what God has revealed, which is what Zoroastrianism is all about. We know that there's good. We know the concept from ancient times. Humanity would not have existed without a concept, not the word, just the concept of what is good for the community and what is not good for the community. There are behaviors that are clearly not good, and we don't want to encourage those in that community. And there are behaviors that are good, and we want to encourage those behaviors in the community. It comes out of literally tribal backgrounds, and we're done because it's time for church. All right, if you're online, I'm done, and I'm going to have to figure out how to save this so we don't lose it. I'm not going at it. I'm going to have my wife come and do it. There will be no class next week. My wife has just said we will be away having fun in the mountains of North Georgia. All right, have a great week, everybody. Nancy, you need to come and stop this because it's going to keep recording forever.
Mine's great.
We're looking forward to it.
Oh.
I'm not sure how we're going to.
We're not sure yet.